I hold here in my formerly nicotine-stained fingers a copy of On the Other Side of Walls. This is the latest release of poetry from Quinn Flanagan. Flanagan is a prolific writer. This is his 87th book since 2015. Stephen King looks at Quinn Flanagan and says, "Damn, boy, how the hell you write so much?" What's the purpose of poetry? It's a stupid question you keep coming across, but one day not too long ago, I decided to answer it. The purpose of poetry is to entertain and inform. And early on in this book, RQF informs us the first person to ever be killed by an automobile was one Henry Bliss in 1899 in Manhattan. Not very blissful at all, he writes. A better question than what's the purpose of poetry is why do we read it? What we want when we read poetry is surprise. There's millions of poems written over the centuries. How can anybody come up with something new that can surprise us? Long-term readers of RQF like myself are accustomed to his prosy style, but here he's given us some good poetic metaphor. I'll get a sip of whiskey first. Poem is Scab. First, I noticed the scab on my forehead. Then I picked and picked and picked, and when the hole was big enough, I climbed inside, burrowed down deep through muscle, tendon, tissue, bone, crouched down low and stayed real quiet. So when you got home from work, I could jump out and frighten you like they do at surprise parties. There's another one here, Midnight Gardener. Some good metaphor. I don't generally like metaphor, but he did some pretty good job on it here. The Midnight Gardener wears a chandelier on his head, Bordeaux style, turn of the century, with many thin candles lighting the way. His pissed yellow Jack Russell barks incessantly at him. He trowels the soil, checks the fence line, gathers his wheelbarrow from the shed, burying each crumpled poem 6 inches apart, then watering. And then he even talks about the Russian sailors on extended deployment. In the last verse of his poem, The Russian Sailors, he writes, "As they worked their tiny periscopes raw and large lonely hands during off hours." A lot of poems in here are humorous, but he's not always a class clown, slumped in the back of the classroom in his desk, shooting spit wads at people. Sometimes he puts on his philosopher's hat, like Rene Descartes, or as we say in Kentucky, Rene Descartes. In his poem, "Cleanliness is next to godliness is next to convenience," he gives us a little bit of philosophy. Everyone wants tight, convenient, comfortable answers to safe questions these days. The A-bomb was desirable not as a deterrent to Russian expansion, but because it was easy and final. In his poem, they speak of rare birds. He's wondering where the rare men are. Doesn't everybody? Everybody wants a hero, right? Here's what he's looking for. Men of a singular, unrivaled temperament and perspective. Men of scarcity, bravery, humor, bursting shoe-polished giants of steady hand, leaders to none and subject to none just the same. Men of perfect range and perfect smoke ring nonchalance, irreverent, gliding, exceptional. Where are these men? Now, he has found a hero, writes about him here. He admires none other than LT, or as non-football fans know him, Lawrence Taylor. I'll read this one to you in entirety. It's a pretty good poem. Growing up watching Lawrence Taylor each weekend, I learned not to be so scared of numbers 2, 3, 4, an army of men against you. He seemed to possess an inner strength and untamable ferocity on the field that others simply did not have. He blew by linemen, slammed through chipping backs and tight ends, devoured quarterbacks like a Mack truck over many highway squirrels. So focused and determined. Forget that he was just another self-entitled crackhead jock. Forget all that. Today I live alone, think alone, write alone. Number 56 overcame the odds every weekend of my childhood out by the New Jersey Meadowlands in Giants blue, and I forever thank him for that. Now, nowhere in that poem does he mention the strip. That's what LT's known for, the strip. Come behind you, slap the ball right out of your hand. That's like writing about Neil Armstrong and never mentioning he was the first man on the moon. Poets love to rag on academia so much, it's almost a cliche. Even the academics do it. Some of y'all might remember Franz Wright. He wrote how MFAs are ruining poetry. Franz Wright was an MFA himself. That's why everybody loves to bag on academia. RQF takes a well-aimed shot at it right here in his poem called Highfalutin. Ever seen a gay man in a straitjacket? I believe that constitutes irony. The mouse with cat in mouth. The first floor high-rise. A basic literary device. A staple of the craft. But the tenured professor remains unimpressed, falling back on Spencer and Hardy and Tennyson like a dependable crutch, citing Who the Hell Cares from Who the Hell Cares, according to the rules of the MLA handbook, holding office hours twice a week in ground-lit, vine-woven concrete tombstones of a building named after other dead rich men a century older, teaching first-year freshmen that this is not Shakespeare and therefore not worthy of their time, or any other time for that matter. See, there's a million and one things I don't like about poets and poetry, and the number one thing is the near total lack of humor, and that's not a problem RQF has. Nobody's ever going to accuse him of being some stuffy modernist. In his book here, he refers to himself as the bunghole Aristotle. Bunghole Aristotle. Diversity is the governing principle of life. Varieties of this and that, an olio, a salamangundi, a mishmash. And just as there are many types of life, so too there are many types of shit. You have your King Arthur, named for the fact that it is solid, crowns at the head on the way out like its close cousin the tadpole, which is wide at the head, then thins out towards the tail. Then you got your Copperhead, which is two-toned with a reddish-tinged head and more conventionally toned body, as well as your King Cobra, which is dark, often after consuming large amounts of red wine, so long through the body so that it sways back and forth before it falls into the bowl coming out. Your sword of Damocles will also sway back and forth, hanging just above the waterline for a time, but unlike the King Cobra, it lacks the darker hue. Then there's the fuzzy bunny, christened such because it looks like it has some stubble on it. The fuzzy bunny bears a striking resemblance to your green moss offering, except that the green moss appears more mossy than hairy and is green in coloration, of course. And then there's a frontal lobe, aptly named because it looks like a brain with its many folds, and the last man on earth, a single small nugget of a thing, often the result of a dairy-induced near constipation. Then there's your state of Nebraska, tightly packed with bits of undigested corn throughout. And your tapeworm, which is light brown, thin, and winding. And let's not forget the drowning man, which sinks right to the bottom, as well as the floaters. No, don't go away. I ain't done. And those are just the solids. Just like high school science, there are liquids and gases as well. The gases are self-explanatory, so we'll get right to the liquids, of which the most common and most regularly occurring is the bowl of chili. This is just your straight-up one-off half-liquid offering dumped piled high and steaming. Then you have your milk cow, which shoots out in short increments of tiny bursts like a farmer's efforts under cow into bucket and the graffiti artist which paints the side of the bowl as much as it hits the water. This is not a comprehensive list, of course. There are many, many more. I'll bet you never thought there were so many kinds. Everyone is always in such a hurry, just doing their thing, wiping, flushing, never taking the time. But I am a student of living, a bunghole Aristotle, a great classifier of the culinary delights, of which there are many kinds. What came out this morning is as of yet identified, but it smells like shit and looks like shit. There you go. No signs of slippage from RQF even after 87 books. Check that one out, On the Other Side of Wall. You will not be disappointed.